My primary loyalty is not to the Republican Party. My primary loyalty is not to Trump. My primary loyalty is to the candidate who, like as we said before, will fight for the end to abortion. He could absolutely be politically using me, but I'm politically using him then.
Hello, and welcome to the third and final part of my conversation with a Donald Trump supporter. In the previous episode, we talked about her views on pro-life and abortion, and in this episode, we dig more into her justification for being a single-issue voter, why this leads to supporting Donald Trump, and what she thinks of the criticism around his COVID response, comments towards women, and other controversies. If you've listened to parts 1 and 2, thank you for sticking around to the end of this journey. I hope it's been worth the while. I do think things really come together in this hour as we get more direct on the issues. So without further ado, here is part 3 of my conversation with a Trump supporter. I think it would be great to, in this hour, just dedicate some time to Trump, like to actually talk about him and like weigh like the pros and cons.
Sure. So I think I don't know how much, I can't remember how much I talked about this last time, but sort of like a little bit of a justification of why, how I could possibly decide to be a single choice or a single issue voter. Because we were saying before, yes, it is absolutely reductionistic. There are a gazillion issues that are important, and that I don't discount the importance of them. I think I have to, there's never going to be a candidate that is exactly what I want and does everything I will ever dream of for America. So I sort of have to prioritize in my voting. And which I think is something that most people do end up doing, because usually, there are nuances. People are nuanced, more nuanced than what the general lines of the party, the two-party system are. So for me, most of my priorities, like I said before, are in ending abortion. And so I guess to defend myself in saying that, I want to ask you to try to put yourself in my mindset, in my frame of mind, of why I do feel so strongly about this. So if you were to believe, as I do, that life begins at conception, and every fertilized egg, even before implantation, every fertilized egg is a human being with rights, the same rights that you or I have, then it sort of follows that abortion is ending a life, ending a human life. Now, just to give you some, I actually found this very helpful for myself too, looking into the numbers, because I didn't know the numbers really beforehand. So I got some facts and figures from the, I'm going to say this wrong, Guttmacher Institute, I think maybe is how you say it, which is a pro-choice organization. And I wanted to get it from a pro-choice organization so that, I didn't want to have the numbers be too much in my favor. But they estimated, and granted, I don't think it's required to report abortions, so these numbers aren't completely accurate. But they estimated that in the most recent numbers in 2017, that there were 862,320 abortions. So in 1 year, 862,320. And so again, if you take this exercise,
does that count? Like what stages does that include? Like, does that involve just like Plan B, all the way up to later abortion?
I believe so. I actually, I'm not positive. I thought I read somewhere there was a question of whether or not there like the chemically induced abortions were counted in this number. I'm going to assume that they were counted, just again to try to. I don't want to inflate these numbers more than they might be.
Sure.
But I think this is probably, my guess is covering from, again, the time that the egg is fertilized to the latest that you could possibly get an abortion. So again, if you put yourself in my frame of mind, there are 862,320 people killed every year, or at least in 1 year, 2017. Now, and this was on the basis of something that they can't control about themselves. It's their age. And they are not recognized as human beings. And the state doesn't recognize them as human beings. So I'm going to ask you this. This is a very leading question. I'm fishing for an answer. But if I were to ask you to think of a time in history where this has happened, where the state has denied the humanity of a certain population and legalized the killing of them, what do you think of?
Well, when you put it that way, the Holocaust.
Yeah. Okay. Like I said, it was very fishing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'll let you go ahead.
Okay. So then I guess and this is more of, it was an exercise for myself, because when I look at big numbers like that, 862,320, like, it's just a number to me. I don't really process it. But so the reason that I'm bringing up the Holocaust is that I can sort of contextualize that number a little bit more for myself. So I looked up some numbers, and this was just in Auschwitz, to compare. So Auschwitz, like the most infamous of the concentration camps, over 4.5 years, from the sources that I read, over 4.5 years, 1.1 million people were murdered at Auschwitz. And so comparing those two numbers, then 3/4 of the total number of people killed in Auschwitz over 4.5 years are aborted in the US in 1 year. So 75% of the total number of people killed in Auschwitz in 4.5 years were aborted in 1 year. And so if you think, again, just an exercise to understand why I feel so strongly about this, is like, if you had the opportunity, without risking like getting sent to a concentration camp yourself, to protest concentration camps, if you had that opportunity some way to go back in time and do that, would you? And I mean, you think, well, hell yeah. Hell yeah, I would. Like, I'd want people to know that I don't condone it. It is wrong, and I want to protect those lives in whatever way I can. And so the fact that I focus my voting entirely on this one issue, I find it as like a very, in a way, a mild form of protest, considering what, if you believe as I do, considering the loss of life that I think is occurring. So
So it sounds like no issue even comes close. Like, this is this is like the issue for you.
Exactly. And so, I mean, I think part of it is also that, going back to this whole, in the last talk that we had, we built up this whole idea of this, the philosophy is what you build on for all of your political for all of your political leanings and all of your political positions. And I think if America doesn't recognize life, then how can it adequately protect it and promote life throughout the whole life cycle if it doesn't know what life is? So it and I think something that we touched on last time was how, you know, I think many policies go back to this root of promoting life, and one of the things that you were saying is to decrease suffering. Um, is but I think it is an important philosophical shift that will need to happen in the U.S. before um, we can really like cohesively move forward in just forming all of our other policies. But anyway, you had other stuff that you were going to say, so go ahead.
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks for all of that. That helps me. I definitely understand like more of your perspective on this, and I mean, obviously, it's a very emotional issue for you. So, thanks for sharing. I do want to just like tease apart some questions I had.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I think when I just listen to your story and I try to like see things from your point of view, um, I can definitely I could definitely understand if I valued or if I like viewed like an unborn like embryo to anything from that to like
Mm-hmm.
uh, a fetus, if I treated that as a human being, like a real life human being, like I can definitely understand how much pain that causes you. I think the difference in my understanding, and maybe like we could share some agreement here, is that not every stage of human life is equal. Let's say, like I think like if we had to compare an embryo that was just fertilized with a um, an 8 month pregnant fetus. I don't know if it's called a fetus at that point, but like an unborn child.
Uh-huh.
Um, those two things aren't the same to me. Like aborting one of those is like dramatically worse in my opinion. Like, is that
And
would
can you
you
tell me
agree, or do you
why?
think those are equal?
Well, tell me why. I want to hear why you say
Yeah.
why you
So
believe
I
that.
think the fact that if it's a child that's just about to be born, there are like nerves. Like it has a nervous system. The heart's actually beating. I think there, and I don't. I have to look up the details on this, but I assume that there's capacity for pain, and there's capacity for suffering. And so like there's this semi-conscious being who is actually aware of what's going on. They have the ability to suffer. Um, and it's like similar to the argument for and like on the other hand you have the embryo which has uh no nervous system, no, like nothing has been developed yet. um like I feel like that is the distinction for me.
Mhm. Um. So then, I guess it sounds like it's this distinction is dependent on the concept of development. Like the embryo is less developed than the 8 month pregnant baby in utero. Um,
Yeah, and,
and
and
so
it's similar. It's
obviously,
not even just purely in humans. Like if we just compare different types of life, like
hmm
do I feel worse about like would I feel worse about eating like killing a chimpanzee or killing a fish or killing like algae, which is like also like a single cell organism. And I would say like, okay, like definitely in that order, right? Because the algae, like plant cells, they, like don't really have consciousness as far as we know. The fish is probably like limited, so I don't feel as bad. But like, okay, if we have a higher order like animal has the ability to like suffer and like have consciousness,
hmm
then like that's sort of like my how I view it.
Gotcha. So I think two things that I want to challenge you on with that. I mean, number one, I understand that you're using a metaphor, so it's not going to be exactly in line with this idea, but with this concept. But the I think one of the differences with this metaphor that you just did of the algae and the fish is that the algae cannot, if left alone, it will not develop into a fish, and if a fish is left alone, it will not develop into a chimpanzee. Whereas if an embryo is left alone, it will develop into a baby that's 8 months in utero. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two is if we sort of extend this criteria, say, because as humans grow, they are still developing. So take like a 3-month-old baby. Is that life less valuable than a 3-year old's life?
Yeah, I think that there is. So I'll address the first one
Mm-hmm.
first. So I have a bit of trouble understanding the, like I can kind of understand like the potential argument. Like if left alone, this thing would develop into this human. And so like given that we should like essentially if this thing left alone will develop into a conscious human, then we killing it is like similar to like killing that conscious human. Um, but also like I don't know if this analogy will work, but I'm going to say it anyway. So like if left alone, all humans are going to die, right? Like we're all
Yeah.
going to turn into like dust. Does that
Yeah.
mean that we should treat ourselves as if we were just dead? Like could you also make the argument that like we are going to be dust someday, and like dust is like there's no ethical problems with uh killing dust or something like that. I mean that's
Mm-hmm.
like I suppose the I feel like whatever is like if we compare, like there is certainly like I would say there is some like thing to say about, okay, sure, if you have two embryos, one is a uh like a plant cell and one is a human embryo, then it's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, okay, like at that level, like if we're everything else is equal, like sure, like you could argue that it's more valuable, but I don't think that in terms of uh like suffering or pain. But like I know that's not the main argument. I think your argument is that the fact that this has potential makes it um more sacred or in a
Mm-hmm.
way.
Yeah. Sorry. I wanted to let you finish. If I don't want to interrupt
No,
you.
no, I don't know if you have any response to.
Yeah, I think really you hit the nail on the head with sort of the I guess the crux of where I see um, the importance of life is that is potential. That's the word that I think is very important. Is that um, you know looking at this idea of do we measure life, the value of life, on the fact that we're all going to die? Well, no, obviously. Then why would we treat anyone better than dust? So so I guess I I find the value in life in the potential. And so because, we don't have the capacity to predict someone's potential, um, uh, and not only like the potential within themselves physically or intellectually, but also the potential impact that they have on the people around them. Um, that to uh, to determine, to sort of predestine someone's potential um, at any point in life is, I mean, it's unrealistic. There's no way that we can do that. And so we have to assume everyone's potential then is great. It cannot be compared. Um,
Well, what if you like compared like an 80-year-old, 90-year-old person who's lived a good life, and
Mhm.
they're like versus a 5-year-old. Like I would personally would not weigh those lives the same. But like in your model of potential, like are those valued differently as well?
Um, no, I mean, granted, like if this is one of the exercises that you're talking about, like the train exercise, is that what's the name for that?
Right. I don't remember the name, but
Oh, that's okay.
you have
It's
to
okay.
run someone over with a train.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The thing
Something
with
like
the
that.
train. So like if I had to choose, do I kill off the 5-year-old or do I kill off the 80-year-old? Um, granted that's I would probably go with the killing off the 80-year-old. Um, but I I don't equate that with um valuing the life less. I think like in that instance, there is no choice. Like
Mhm.
there has to be loss of life somewhere, and uh,
Yeah, that
gosh,
makes sense. Yeah.
um, yeah,
So I
that's
think that there is so maybe to like segue into another topic, but
sure,
I just want to wrap up this one. Like
yeah, sure, sure.
I think the difference that we have is and obviously I want you to chime in on this, but I think the difference that we have on this topic is I think your hierarchy of what is most important,
Hmm.
like everything that involves life, or like everything that destroys life, is categorically worse than anything that might cause suffering, but not loss
Oh,
of life.
yeah,
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
whereas I sort of mix those a little bit. Like I balance both together. So like for example, uh, like for if a family like they just can't afford to raise a child, um, and it's like a plan B sort of situation. I think that if we weigh like the suffering that we cause on an embryo, or like the suffering there's no suffering necessarily, but there's the end of life, right? So the ending of that potential life
Mhm.
versus having the child, and then perhaps a lifetime of suffering, or at least a childhood of suffering for the child and for the family because they weren't prepared for that. I kind of like take both of those into consideration into that decision. Obviously, when it comes to uh, and obviously when it comes to like fetuses or or unborn children with more developed neural capabilities, it obviously gets more sticky, but and then like the balance will shift. But like I kind of see like, all right, the value of life um, balance like kind of changes depending on how developed a child is, and then also you have to weigh like the other consequences. Um, do you think I sort of described that distinction a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a very good distilling down of this idea that we were talking about before of like uh, your main, I guess, truth, if we go back to this whole idea of the trunk, is to decrease suffering in the world, whereas mine is like the protection of life, just like you were saying. And so like you said, I value the protection of life over the prevention of suffering. And I think part of that is that, number one, I sometimes do think that suffering is valuable. Um, uh, and suffering is not unique to humans. We see it in nature as well. And so I think it's just a part of what this universe is. Um, that there is suffering, and the great thing about humanity is that we have the challenge then to bring the good out of suffering. um
But would you also say that it's like the aim is to also reduce suffering in humanity as well?
I mean, I think there are definitely some instances where, heck yeah, I would reduce suffering. So,
Mhm.
for example, if someone's dying, if someone is dying and there's no way to stop that train from going down that track, then of course, we'd want that passing to be as peaceful as we could make it. I think that if it were a choice between something that I would say, if I would risk doing something that I would see as immoral for the sake of decreasing suffering, then it should not be chosen. If 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 I do something good to decrease suffering, then that's great. Let's decrease the suffering.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting that you put it that way, because like it's almost like I equate good and bad I
With the suffering.
with decreasing or increasing suffering, um,
Hmm.
whereas you sort of view like there's a almost like a separate like good and bad, and then also um,
Hmm.
and suffering. But cool. I think that was a really illuminating conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to ask you a little bit about since we promised our listeners 3 hours ago, um, just to talk about Trump a little bit.
Oh
So,
yeah, totally.
um, yeah, I think a lot of listeners who may not be Trump supporters,
Hmm.
who are are open minded enough to listen to this conversation, would be curious, and I'm curious too.
Yeah,
What do you think about um, like Donald Trump as a president overall? Like, so if we look at all the um, look at all the other issues and controversies or things he said, like how um, like what is your reaction to some of those, and how do you feel about them? And we can pull out some specific examples if that helps.
yeah, sure. So I think I touched on this a little bit before. Uh, I never imagined a president of the United States to look anything like Donald Trump. You know, I'd figured that position was only reserved for people who, you know, are diplomatic, uh, are political, like they make their they make their career out of politics. Like their whole career has been based on politics. So I I don't think if I were to paint the picture of an ideal president, I don't think it would look like Donald Trump. Definitely not.
Mhm.
He certainly has flaws, a lot of them. If we could, I would love to elect the future saint to the office, and we know he's not one. One virtue that I can appreciate, and granted, it's sometimes not it's a virtue that might not always work out in the best. But one thing that I do think Donald Trump does do, which I can appreciate, is that he does say what he believes. You're not left wondering, okay, wait a minute, where do you actually stand on this issue? Um, and granted, uh, from things that we've seen in the media, that position might flip flop, but from like several years before to now. Um, but you know, it seems like what he advocates for, um, what he pushes for, he actually follows through with that, or at least tries to.
Mhm.
Uh, so I mean, I certainly, like I said, in 2016, I didn't vote for Trump. I voted for a write-in ballot member because I was like, there's no way Trump can, like, there's no way I can see him in office. And then what do you know? Um,
And who is the write-in, if you don't mind sharing?
oh yeah, no, you asked me that last time. I don't remember his
Oh
name.
yeah,
Like, so
yeah, that's right.
nothing ever came of that. And so I think that's very telling of how the reason why I felt like, you know, I was taking this philosophical stance in
Mhm.
2016, like, well, I'm just going to have my voice heard.
Yeah.
I'm going to, even though this person will probably never win, I'm going to vote for this person. And, I don't even remember who it was now. So, granted, they lined up a lot more with what my ideal candidate would have looked like, a lot more so than Trump did. But it was basically a throwaway vote. So,
So
and
do you
again,
mind?
yep.
Oh, go ahead. Were you gonna finish?
Well, basically, I don't necessarily have loyalty to my my primary loyalty is not to the Republican Party. My primary loyalty is not to Trump. My primary loyalty is to the candidate who, like as we said before, will fight for the end to abortion. And so if tomorrow Joe Biden says, that's it, no more abortion, and Trump wakes up and says, that's it, guys, let's keep abortion. We want to protect the rights of pro-choice voters. Then I'd vote for Biden, like just like that.
And would you feel like how would you feel if the policies were just flipped on abortion and nothing else? Like how would you feel about Biden versus you feel about Trump right now?
If I believed that Biden was going to do, like, try to get it done in the 4 years, in the next 4 years, then I'm going to support him because that's my priority.
Mhm.
Um, so anyway, talking again, it's great to say, okay, I support whoever is going to say I'm gonna fight for the pro-life movement, but you have to have backing for that. And I think the last 4 years, Trump has given me some backing, which makes me, which is one of the reasons, the main reason why I did flip on this decision in 2016 when I was like, no, not Trump, and then 2020, here I am, yeah, let's do Trump. Um, that he has given me, some evidence that he will fight for the pro-life movement. Um, and so in my lifetime, like, just to go through things that we've seen in the last 4 years from him, in my lifetime, he has been the most outspokenly pro-life president. Now, granted,
I feel like
it's
he's
not very long.
outspoken about everything, but
That's true. Yeah, for better or for worse. Yeah, absolutely. But for example, like, he was the first president in all of our history to the current president to speak at the March for Life in Washington D.C. And hold on, I've got some notes here. I'm trying to read my handwriting.
so this is actually an editor's note added in post-production. There are some things that Donald Trump has done for the pro-life movement that my guest wanted to mention, but we never got the chance. So she sent me a few bullet points, and I'm just going to read those here. So 2 conservatives' appointments to the Supreme Court, increasing the possibility of overturning Roe v. Wade, changing the rules of Title X funding to prevent taxpayer money from indirectly subsidizing abortions at facilities that provide Title X services, expanded the Mexico City policy to prevent taxpayer money from funding groups that promote or provide abortions internationally, and issued an executive order that prevents employers from being mandated to provide health insurance that covers abortion-inducing drugs/devices if it violates the employer's conscience. Okay, now back to the regular scheduled programming.
I think he doesn't speak around the issue. He doesn't dance around the issue. He goes right out and says it, and he sort of does it without worrying about the condemnations that he'll most certainly receive for him.
Yeah, do you think he like genuinely supports this because he is a good person and cares, or because he knows that this will be helpful politically?
Oh, it could totally be politically. He could absolutely be politically using me, but I'm politically using him then.
Yeah, I see. So
Yeah.
it really doesn't matter what his intentions are. It's really just a means to an end. Or
Yeah,
like
I
I'm
mean,
saying like
yeah, and I think that's just the whole way you have to approach politics, is that there's no way that we can prove, okay, which candidate really deep in their soul believes what they're fighting for. how can you prove that? But yeah, no, I would like if he is just saying this to get the votes, then you know what, he's gonna get the votes.
Mhm.
um, yeah.
Yeah, one like question I'd like to pose, and is around and like kind of tying it into life is how he handled the COVID pandemic. So I think there's a video that summarized this pretty well, but there's like Donald Trump was a big denier of this pandemic early on,
Mhm.
and there's videos of him in February pretty much saying like we're fine, there's no pandemic, um, and like we don't need to worry about it, like we don't need to do anything. While other countries were already like making masks and preparing and starting to lock down. Um, Only like a month later, once things had already escalated quite a bit, he made another statement that said, "I've always said it was a pandemic. This is a very serious situation. I've
Mhm.
been saying it all along." And then he started blaming like other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would argue that you could probably tie and now like I think I don't know the exact numbers, but hundreds of thousands of people in the U.S. have died from the COVID uh, disease. So
Mhm.
I would say that if we had better leadership, if we had someone who told the truth and
Mhm.
who was actually who listened to the experts earlier on, and like we actually prepared ourselves, that the U.S. could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Um, you look at you look at a country like China, like we're like um, the total number of cases they've had are like is like what we're getting every single day now. So like how do you like what do you think about that? Like I don't know, the whole timeline and arc, and the fact that like these are human lives too. Like actual human lives
Mhm. Mhm.
are lost because of uh, a president's decisions. And this is just one example, right? Like this is like I think there are a lot of uh, like less direct impacts, but like yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that one.
Oh yeah, very good question. And I totally agree. I think that you know, especially with my like life is priority, then this is a big issue. This should be a big issue, and I think this sort of this can sort of be taken back to just healthcare in general. Um, so like the question of universal healthcare versus uh, more privatized healthcare.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it isn't to be neglected. It isn't to be discounted. Um, there certainly uh, was and probably in certain areas of the United States could be better ways to much better ways to respond to all of this to protect life. Um, Now, what those should have been, I don't know. Probably number one to like if there was that compelling data that we were receiving, then to act on it, then yes, absolutely. Um, I think I think it sort of goes back to this whole idea of the philosophy around life needs to be defined before we can actually um, adequately protect it uh, throughout the whole course of life. Um,
But in this case, like if
mhm,
we just had like a president who acted earlier, uh,
mhm.
like that would also there's not a prerequisite necessarily to like establish a philosophy, or I guess like what do you
Yeah.
mean by
Well,
a
I think
philosophy?
yeah, I think it's a shift in how Americans think that needs to happen in order for us to move to a more number one a more peaceful society, a more harmonious society. I think there has to be a great shift in how we interact with everybody, and I think if we were to have that shift in mentality, then a lot of these issues that we see further down the line, so like issues like making huge decisions for the health of your constituents based on something besides like the good of these people, the good of their lives. So maybe like political gain, seeing political gain as a preferable option to the protection of human life. And that's sort of how you get to see some of these other decisions that are being made. And I mean, is that something that we can force people into shifting, into thinking with policy? I'm dubious. I think a lot of that is, and this is sort of one of the reasons why I'm so grateful for this opportunity, is a lot of it is in personal contact and in the way that you talk with each other, in the way that you give examples to just the people around you. I think on an individual level, you have potential for great impact, to really promote this more harmonious, loving way of living.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like interesting because you described like this harmonious, loving, and like I would say that when I think of Donald Trump, I definitely it's almost like the opposite of harmonious and loving. Like,
Uh-huh.
and not necessarily through his actions on pro-life, but just like looking at the way that he has like talked about women in the past,
Mm-hmm.
or uh, the sort of way he's talked with protesters, and and like he just like he calls people's names, right? Like even in the Republican Party, like when he was running, like it's not just Sleepy Joe, but like Lion Ted, right? And like, and I know like, yeah, like I suppose that uh, like a few people would disagree with a goal of a more harmonious
Right.
and loving society. Like I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's something that most people want,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that for most people, or for most people who don't support him, and I think for me, like when I think of um, yeah, like when I think of which candidate is more synonymous, or like under which I can imagine more like harmonious and loving society, I
Mm-hmm.
think of whoever, like not Donald Trump. um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I guess, yeah, like I guess, like what do you think about like some of the comments he's made about women in the past, and those controversies? Like do you kind of like uh, do those bother you? Do they not really bother you?
Oh
What do
yeah,
you
no,
think?
I mean, like I said, I've never really, I would never, uh, I wouldn't choose to make him the father figure of like my children. um, I think that uh, his position as the United States, as the president of the United States, he is a public figure, and so he has become the face of our country. Um, though at the same time, you know, the culture of the United States, we cannot chalk it all the way up to our president, because um, that is what is a country made out of? Is made out of the individuals who are within it. And so especially when we have this sort of system of election where, one year you could have one uh, one term you could have one type of president, and one term you could have a totally different type of president, then that if our culture and if our whole society is dependent on the way that he acts or the way that he speaks, then we're going to have it's just going to be very torrential regardless. I think that in the capacity that he is, that he has power to make the political decisions that he is, he's not going to be perfect. Absolutely, absolutely not. We have had many presidents who were not perfect, and we will have many presidents in the future who are not perfect. And that's a very mild way of putting it. I think not only for him, but also for a lot of our presidents in the past. But going back to this idea of there are some things that I prioritize and I can't compromise on. This is one of them.
So yeah, so I mean, I really appreciate you describing that. So I think the one thing I was curious to ask you is, so like we talked a little bit about how you actually have a couple things. So the first one is like when you balance, so in the lens of life is sacred. So like when we look at the the obviously the one side we have the abortion issue, and that's like of core importance to you. It just as a thought experiment, like if there was a president, like if Donald Trump started like so I think the policy of COVID is maybe a little less direct, but like let's just say like Donald Trump starts putting people in concentration camps. Like how do you balance like at what point, like how severe does that have to be to like flip it? Or do you know what I mean? Like if you had to weigh like, all right, he's anti-abortion, but he's putting Muslims in concentration camps and they're dying there, right? Like do like for me that's like, yeah, I'm just curious like how you work through like that kind of scenario.
Like at what point does someone turn into too much of a monster that even if they were pro-life,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Or like at least the way I think about it is like balancing the harm versus the good. Like his pro-life choices may prevent this many abortions and like this many lives, but then his other policy is killing people, is like ending lives. So you have like saving lives, ending lives, but one is through abortion policies, one is through like uh like I feel like maybe something, yeah, like I don't know exactly what, but
no, absolutely. And so I think good question. I think the we were talking before about like with COVID, with healthcare, why aren't those sort of, if I am so pro-life, why aren't those also up there with the abortion policies? And for me, I think a lot of it is the a lot of the difference lies in the fact of how actively life and how intentionally life is being ended in the two different situations. So, for example, I heard this I guess metaphor to explain it a little bit more. Say you're on a boat and it starts sinking, and people are starting to drown, and you're with your wife and your son, and you have a little rowboat or something, a little piece of wood like Titanic. You have to figure out, okay, who can I put on this piece of wood with me, and you only have room for one. There is a difference in going to save your wife and trying to also save your son, but the the piece of wood starts sinking, you can't save him. There's a difference between that and a difference between going to save your wife and then holding your son down under the water.
Mhm.
And that I, you know, there right now with COVID, with healthcare, with violence, there are uh, ways that life is being ended, that life is probably preventably being ended. Um, but it is not active in the same way that abortion is actively ending life, intentionally ending life. And so I think that is how I why I prioritize that so much over issues like the loss of life with COVID. Um, that Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, then if, like, let's uh, ignore the COVID situation for a while, but like
Sure.
if it
Sure.
was the concentration camp,
Okay.
like executing like a certain race, like would that, like if there's the
Yeah.
intentionality, then
Yeah.
it's
Like if we elected a Hitler, if Trump became Hitler, then yeah, I would definitely fall off the bandwagon for Trump.
yeah,
Definitely. I certainly hope to God that I would. That
yeah.
I'd have
So
that. Yep.
it is like the intentionality.
Yes.
It's not
Behind the
necessarily that.
policy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That I think there, in a way, the abortion is very active with that intention, and the other things, you know, it's not necessarily intention, but it might have the same outcome. So uh yeah.
Okay. And then another question, kind of like more of a rapid fire one, is, so
Sure.
I'm curious, like if abortion was illegal, and
Hmm.
like, so now we have Democrats and Republicans, like you have the Joe Biden and Donald Trump, or like Democrat, Republican.
Hmm.
All the other issues are the same, but that one is not talked about. Uh, where do you lie on all the other issues? Like if you had to choose. So I guess like on healthcare, on uh, like economics in general, social things like that.
Very good question.
Yeah.
So to be absolutely honest with you, because this has been I've put so much of my energy, my political energy into this. Um, I I don't know honestly very much about the other issues. Looking at healthcare, I did some reading once before. I think it was Paul Farmer. He's a guy who talks in uh, a lot about the access to healthcare. He's written a few books. Um, and one thing that he once said is that healthcare is not a commodity like any other thing to be bought or sold. Um, which you know, I I like that idea. I think I can get behind that. Now, the application of that is incredibly difficult. Um, where do we even begin with that? I have no idea.
Hmm.
Um, I haven't looked into different speakers. I haven't uh, compared with different societies. So like those who have more socialistic organization of society, how their healthcare, how does it function? I've heard things on both sides. Like the system is so uh, overrun that it's not nearly as effective as it would have been, or it's it works great. Everyone has access to the basic needs. Um, I mean, so I like the idea of people being able to receive healthcare, regardless of whether or not they can pay. Um, Now, is that realistic? I don't know. Other issues,
So yeah, what
immigration.
about like? Oh yeah, I was gonna say like you could talk about immigration. Like I'm
Hmm.
curious about like the LGBT, and like, yeah, I'm just trying to think of their uh, other like hot topic issues, I guess.
Hmm.
And feel free if you don't want to share as well. that's
It's
fine.
fine.
I just
Sure.
kind of I think it's interesting to um and I think it's useful to like paint a full picture
Oh,
of someone,
sure.
right? Like I think a
Yeah.
lot of people, they think of a Trump supporter, they think like, all right, they're just fully on the right on every single issue. But it's like I think most
It's
people are
very
more
nuanced.
complicated. Like there's
Yeah.
like everyone's a human and like wired
Mhm.
slightly differently. So.
Yeah. So with immigration, again, the practical application is really where the difficulty lies. A lot of people do immigrate because they're forced to, because the places that they're coming from are really, really difficult situations. I think our country was built upon immigrants, um, and we. I find it unfortunate that it has the rhetoric. Well, I don't know if the rhetoric has changed, because there has been points in history where when immigrants um, were definitely rejected by society. Um, but I mean, I wish that it were easier for people to become citizens. Now, um, do I think that it's okay for people who are not documented to reap the benefits of citizenship without um, being a citizen? Well, that's harder, because there are people who are paying taxes who are citizens and who have to pay the taxes to reap those benefits. And so, again, the application, like I love, I love the idea of being able to protect, being the country that, like, give me your poor, give me your unwanted, whatever the Statue of Liberty says. Um,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, and I
but
think I would like mostly agree with that. Like there, yeah, like I don't think I agree with either extreme on that one
mhm.
for sure.
um, the pictures that I've seen of things that have happened at, like, the U.S. and Mexico border, that that hurts. Um,
What are you talking about? The like
so,
ICE?
like, for example, yeah, the kids who are separated from their families.
Mhm.
It's I'm sure the kids had no. They weren't the ones who were saying, "Okay, we have to go across the border." It was just a traumatic experience. But how do we take them in? If How do we take them all, and how do we support them all if it's really easy to get into America? I don't know, because that's one obligation that the government has to its people is, to a certain point you have to be able to provide for your citizens.
Mhm.
And but let's see, uh, LGBTQ. That's again another hot topic.
Mhm.
I think if you want to hear about that, we have to have another episode or
Okay,
3 episodes.
another two-part series.
Yeah, yeah. um, let's see. What are some other ones? Foreign policy.
Yeah, foreign policy, climate change.
Oh, climate change. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of room to be done to protect our environment. Yeah, I don't deny that there's climate change, and that um, we have impacted our world, and that we have not been good stewards of our world. Um, I think that now that we are starting to wise up and realize, okay, this there are consequences of what we've been doing for the last 50 years, or for the last 200 years, I guess. Um, Now that we're wisening up to that, there does need to be a change in what we do. I absolutely believe in that. Yeah.
I
Um,
think the world would be or the American political system would be a better place if we had a representative in the Republican Party. Uh,
no way, Jose. Oh, you have to beat my name out.
oh, what do I say? if we, I'll just cut that part out. Whatever.
No, you're good,
Good
you're
call. Good
good.
call.
Um,
But yeah, I think it's like, and I'm sure it's not easy to because like you do have this like one like issue that's more important than everything else, but um, yeah, like or actually maybe like how like is there a feeling of like, all right, I feel good about this issue, but like I have to sacrifice like I know that
oh yeah,
Donald Trump is not doing like as much for the environment or for like these
yeah,
kids at the immigration centers and things like that.
yeah. I think that's inherent in the decision to be a single issue voter, is that there is going to be opportunity cost for the other causes that you believe in. And so the only way that someone can be a single issue voter is if they really can say the the cost of the loss in all of the advancements in these areas still does not outweigh the importance of this one issue. And so I think there probably, I wonder if there are any very many single issue voters out there who really do um, think that way, because that is a huge opportunity cost. You know, that's hard to justify, and so you have to have a really really good reason in order to justify it. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, absolutely, there is opportunity cost,
Yeah,
and
and
it
I
would be
think it
silly
goes both
to
ways.
deny it. Pardon?
Oh, I was saying I think that goes both ways too. Like I think
Hmm.
um, yeah, even on the Democratic side, I'm sure there are certain policies but that's just the problem of having two Democratic parties, right? You have to choose, and you can't just uh, it's not like you can pick and choose at like a froyo shop, like here are all the things that I want. But
I want the M&Ms, but not the
yeah,
chocolate chips.
the berries or something.
Yeah.
So I think this was a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on here in this 2 hour, no, 3 hour saga, which we'll
Oh
break up
God.
into smaller chunks, I'm sure. Or I just put the whole thing out there, just like marathon it. But I, yeah, I guess I'd like to like reemphasize that like the what we talked about in the beginning of one of my goals out of having this conversation was to sort of give an example or display and exercise the ability to have a conversation with someone who you might have fundamental disagreements with, and I think we did pretty well. I think that
Yeah,
I feel
absolutely.
I feel like we were able to see each other's point of view and understand it a little bit better.
Yeah. Do you
And
still want to be my friend?
yeah, so I got a committee meeting after this to decide on that with myself. No, definitely, of course.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I guess I'd like to um, leave the listeners like if there's anything. Well, let me put it this way. I think most of my listeners um, are probably left leaning, and they may not hear from as many people who do support Donald Trump. Is there anything that you'd like to leave them with, or that you'd like to ask of the listeners?
Well, I guess firstly, if you've been listening through this whole thing and you've been hearing me out, then first I want to say thank you so much, and also to you, Peter. Thank you so much. I think that is, one of the most important things of friendship, but also any relationship. Like, I think that the ability to speak through something that's difficult is something that we should practice and we should foster, because it's important in any relationship you have. I think, if you ever want to get married, that's going to be a huge skill that you have to develop. And so what better way to practice that than in friendship? um, and so first of all, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and your effort to understand a little bit more, even if you disagree. I Yeah, I'd encourage you to try to practice this with all of your other friends or family, and not necessarily just in the realm of politics, but other realms of life as well. I think there's a lot to be learned from other people, and it also helps you in being able to self-reflect. It helps myself. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to really understand why I believe what I believe and to delve into that a bit more. But yeah, that's the main thing, is gratitude. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much. I know this was you definitely did a lot more preparation than I did, and so
No. Well, you were very patient with me through it all. Thank you.
all right. Well, thanks again.